Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. And we are in Genesis chapter 43 through 45. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pray, and then we're going to get right into the Word. Father God, thank you so much for loving us beyond measure, even today. And Lord, I just pray that you would clothe each one of us with your peace and with your understanding for the things that have to be accomplished today, for the work that you've established for our hands. And Lord, I pray that you'd go before us into conflict and into exhaustion, Lord. I pray you'd go with us to the places that you know we're going to have to walk today. And I praise you, Lord, for already being there. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Okay, so we are in chapter 43 of Genesis, and here we have, I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit of it, and then we're going to go ahead and get into the Word. So here, the boys, Joseph's brothers, need to go back to Egypt to get more food after they've already gotten some, and they have been begging their father to please let us go back. But the man who is over us in the food situation, he is a powerful man, and he said that he would not even consider seeing us until we brought our younger brother. And his father, their father, is just like, why did you even tell them that you had a younger brother? And I said, well, we didn't know. He was questioning us. He claimed we were spies. We said, no, we're not. There's actually 12 of us. One of them's no more, and one of them's still with our father. And we tried to explain ourselves, and he said, well, then bring me your younger brother. So how are we to know? So it finally gets to a desperate enough situation. It had been several months, possibly a year, at least maybe a year, that they have been gone away from Joseph. And so finally their father, Jacob, he relents and says, okay, you guys can go back. And the interesting thing is here that what he says is that if I perish, then I perish. If I'm bereaved, then I'm bereaved. It sounds a lot like Esther when she says, if I perish, then I perish. And it also sounds a lot like the Lord when he was in the garden. He says, Lord, not your will, but mine. And I want us to notice that we keep going back and forth between the name of Jacob and the name of Israel. And we'll notice that whenever it is time to really stand in faith, that it'll go back to the name Israel instead of Jacob. And Israel meaning the Lord has chosen me. The Lord is with me. And so it's not surprising that he's kind of going back and forth here. He goes back to his old Jacob ways, and then he comes back into being really who he is, which is this precious chosen one of the Father to be revealed to all people, and that would be Israel. So the men have gone back. So let's go ahead and start at verse 19 of 43. So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house. Now, the men had to have wondered, why do we have to be brought here to the house? Why not just go ahead and, go back to the bread lines where everybody else is? But we beg your pardon, our Lord. They said, we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where we stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight in the mouth of each sack. So we have brought it back. We brought it back with us. We've also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks. So now they have 20 bags of silver in order to buy the food that they're going to need for their families. Because they started with the 10. Now they brought back some more, so they've got the 20, which is 20 silver pieces is what they originally sold Joseph for. I think that's an interesting thing there. It's all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver. Then he brought Simeon out to them. So I don't know if the steward knows any part of this, but it's interesting because Joseph has had enough influence in those around him that they are beginning to realize that this God of the Hebrews is the one true God, the God of their fathers. At least that's the indication that we get here. We forget, I think sometimes we're reading along, we go, oh yeah, of course they would say the God of your fathers. But this is an Egyptian who said this to them that would have had no connection with the God of his father, and maybe he didn't know who Joseph even was. I don't know. It's just an interesting turn that he would say that to them. So Simeon, who's been in prison for about a year, is brought back out to them. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water and wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because he had heard that they were to eat because they had heard that they were to eat there. I just kind of wonder if they are kind of like, okay. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, "How's your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" And they replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." Don't you know he was relieved because he had waited for them to come back, and he could have revealed himself at the very beginning. He could have not put this off. It's kind of a wonder that he did, other than the fact that he really was intent on seeing Benjamin. And since they hadn't brought Benjamin, he had to find a reason for them to come back to him with Benjamin. So in order to guarantee that they would come directly to him and not go to any other place in Egypt to get food, because there were storehouses all over Egypt, in order to guarantee that they brought Benjamin to him, he had kept the older brother Simeon. They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well," and they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother Joseph, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. Now, there was a time that my husband taught his brother, the first time he came home on furlough from the mission field. He'd been there for 4 years, and that was at least for me, it was a very emotional moment to see the brothers see each other for the very first time. And I can only imagine after over 20 years seeing this. He was just a kid, maybe a baby even. He might have been a toddler or a boy when Joseph was sold into slavery. But to see this one that was so closely tied to him. And even at this point, not knowing for sure if he was going to get to see his father, didn't know. They said he was well, but there's still a lot of things to pass. But now he has Benjamin, and he's not going to let him go. After he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, serve the food. They served him by himself because of the position that he would have had in Egypt. The brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest. Now, I heard a preacher say one time, and if that had been random, the mathematical equation for that would have been 40 million to 1. So for him to have gotten that right was not even a probability. And so I'm certain that this would have been quite a shock. And they looked at each other in astonishment, because they're all just grown men, bearded. A lot of them are just maybe less than a year apart from one another. Many of them may be almost very close to the same age, because they had different mothers. And you could have had some that were just 2 or 3 months apart, maybe even born the same month. We don't know. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. So they feasted and drank freely with him. I still wonder what must have been going through their minds. It's one thing to go ahead and give us the food that we've paid for, but what is going on here? What is really, it said they went on ahead and relaxed. This is an interesting fellow we have here. Interesting man that's in charge of Egypt. He wants to eat with us. Now, Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of the house. Fill the man's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver of his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done. Now, we have to remember the Egyptians actually did have quite a bit of magic up their sleeves when you go back to Moses, and everything that they were able to accomplish with him. And they were able to duplicate many of the first couple of things that the Lord had Moses do. They were able to duplicate, and so this was a common thing. When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to him. But they said to him, "Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We've been brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." They were so convinced that they did not have it. "Very well, then," he said, "let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. The intensity of what was happening here, because not only when they got to those sacks, the silver was in the top of each one of those sacks, and they began to pull it out. So everything they had just said to the steward, we brought you back the silver. Now then, it looks like they've stolen it away again. So here's the silver, and he's like, okay, then what's this? Oh, it's the silver. Oh, you say you brought it to us, but no, you didn't. And all the way down, the intensity of that moment, that gut-wrenching, what is happening, I think we may have been set up. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" "What can we say to my lord?" Judah replied. Now it's interesting because Judah is the one who stepped up first here. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves, and the one who is found to have the cup." So they've resolved that none of them are going back. That they can't face their dad. They're all slaves now. But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace." I think that Joseph right here, he is, not only is he testing the men, the brothers, he's not just testing them. He's also willing to just keep Benjamin with him. If Benjamin is being mistreated, if Benjamin is being hurt the way that he was hurt by their ridicule, he is willing to just keep Benjamin and go ahead and maybe even let his father suffer if that's the case. His dad can't protect him from the way the men are treating his baby brother, the way that he had been treated by them. Then he's going to protect him, and I think that he's willing for them not to ever know who he was. And that as soon as they leave, then he's going to reveal himself to Benjamin. He'll raise Benjamin up next to him. He'll rule with him. He'll be there next to him. He'll be able to take care of him. And I think that is what's in his heart here. That's what he's willing to do. He had to have a reason to keep him before he couldn't have just snatched him from them, because then they would have known something else, and it would have been unjust even to the Egyptians that are around him. He has to follow some decorum. So that's why I think that he said that he'll just keep Benjamin, is because he was willing just to let the boys go on and then reveal himself just to him. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we answered, 'We have an aged father, and there's a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him.' Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, so I can see him for myself.' And we said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves his father, he will die.' But you told your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, You will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, go back and buy a little more food. But we said, we cannot go down. So he's telling the whole story. Only if your youngest brother is with you will we go. Will we go? And we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. Interesting because it's still all there. And we've talked about this before. This family dynamic has not gone away since the men are grown. He's saying, you know that my wife, my true soulmate, the one that I really loved, she only had 2 sons. The rest of you, you're important for the field. You're important for, you're my son. He didn't even say they're his sons, but of course they are his sons, but he's still, he's creating a lot of animosity for those men. And I think that there's something to be said about favoritism in the home that is so destructive. That Jacob created a situation in his own life. So much of Jacob's trouble, so much of Israel's trouble was at that point was brought on to himself. A lot of it was. And yet the Lord was still orchestrating and still working and still using him and still using the lives of his sons in order to accomplish his will. And that was to reveal himself. One of them went away from me, and I said, he has surely been torn to pieces. Interesting because they go ahead and they repeat what his father said. He said up here that he was dead, that Joseph was dead, but goes ahead and tells the story just as it is. And that's the way that if you repeat the same thing over and over again, that's the way you're going to say it. One of them went away from me and said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. This is Judah speaking, and I think it's very interesting that it is Judah because Judah is, the lineage from which Jesus eventually came, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And he's willing at this point in time, this man Judah is willing to take the blame for something he did not do. He's willing to take the blame for the life of Benjamin and willing to replace Benjamin with his life. Now then, please let your servant remain here in my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that will come on my father. So now Joseph has realized that the men are resolute, that they are not going to let him just go ahead and keep Benjamin. He also realizes that there's been a heart change too, and that Judah is willing to stay instead, and he is willing to sacrifice for Benjamin. So I think that he's finally convinced that there has been a change in the family. Now it's interesting to note that change would not have happened if Joseph had not been sold into slavery, if the men were not bearing up under the guilt of what had already happened. This moment when there's going to be resolution would have never happened if these things had not happened to Joseph. So I think in our family conflicts that some family conflicts are so deep and so hurtful that we think there can be absolutely no resolution. And I know that Joseph never thought there could be resolution. Of course, the boys thought there could never be any resolution, but the Lord was, even in this, he was bringing healing to them, even through the consequences of something that was the worst thing that could possibly happen, other than if Joseph had actually died. But even though they did think that Joseph was dead, they didn't know where he was. They didn't know if he was a slave in someone's basement. They didn't know what had happened to him. They just knew they weren't ever going to see him again. But there had been a healing that took place in the family unit because of what Joseph, at least between the brothers. Now the father is still playing huge favorites, but they have resolved themselves that that's just the way it's going to be. And they love their father and they want to protect Benjamin on behalf of their father, or maybe on behalf of Benjamin too. Maybe the guilt has driven them to that place, but whatever it is, there is a change in the family unit that wasn't there when Joseph left it, and he sees that. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. I think that's interesting too, because I'm not sure why he wanted all the Egyptians to leave, and this was a private family matter. I have to settle this here, and I have to remove my garments, and I wouldn't be able to do that. My headpiece or whatever this is, this garb that I have on me, I have to do that, and he would never do that in front of those that were attending him, in front of his servants. And he wept so loudly the Egyptians heard him. So as they were leaving, they could hear him weeping. Oh my goodness! And Pharaoh's household heard about it. So this was a big deal for a man like this to be weeping, and they're going, "What on earth is going on?" I don't know if his head steward knew what was going on at all, but word got all the way back to Pharaoh. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Is he really still alive?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. It'd be like seeing a ghost. Here's this brother that was, and everything that's processing through their minds. How can this be? When you look at the parallels between Joseph and Jesus, it's like when the disciples they couldn't believe that Jesus was alive. In the same way, Joseph has been dead in their minds all of these years, not knowing what had happened to him. And here he stands before them. Not only is he alive, but he is victorious. And he is a ruler. And he is over all of Egypt. I mean, that is very much what the disciples were experiencing. And this is what these men are experiencing. And we see in the Old Testament a snapshot of pictures that we see in the New Testament. We see pieces of the Lord revealing himself. So this is like this is a foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do. He was sold for 30 pieces of silver. He was rejected by those that were closest to him. And then he was left for dead with them. He was crucified, and everyone abandoned him. Except for there was John, who did not abandon him. And here he is, the one brother who did not do this cruel thing to him, Benjamin. And here he is, who can draw him close to him again. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one who you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here." He is completely releasing them of the responsibility of their sin against him. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. So he has reconciled himself not only to the place that he's forgiven his brothers, but that he's recognized it as God who did this, and he's forgiven God. He's forgiven God for this life change, for this incredibly brokenness that he had to feel. The rejection, the slavery, the prison, all of it. Not only has he recognized that it was God's hand that did this in his life, but that it was God's hand that also protected him and sustained him. And not only has he forgiven the boys, he's forgiven God. There was a time in my life that we were in a great amount of distress, and I went before the Lord. And I said, "Lord, you could have changed it. You could change these people's hearts. You could, and I was full of fear and anxiety about the situation. And the Lord said to me, "So why are you blaming your husband? Why are you blaming those around you that you feel like that have authority over you? Who is it that brought you to this place?" Well, you did. Who is it that knows what your needs are? Well, you do. Then who is it that has brought you right now to this place of need, this place of anxiety, this place? Who did this? Well, Lord, you did. And that was a very hard place for me to go, because I wanted to blame those around me. I wanted to keep bitterness in my heart for those that had caused me pain, for those that were I felt like letting me down at that point, for those who I felt like had rejected me. And the Lord said, but I'm the one who orchestrated this part in your life. I'm either over your life or I'm not. And when I broke down and said, Lord, it's your fault, and he cleansed over me and allowed me not only to forgive those around me, when I gave him responsibility, I also gave him responsibility to fix it. I gave him the trust in order to do this. But see, if we get stuck in that God, this is your fault mode, and we don't come to the place where we realize that God has a plan, that's when we end up with people who are like, well, this bad, horrible thing happened to me, and I don't want to have anything to do with God anymore because God abandoned me. But see, God did not abandon Joseph. He was orchestrating his life to fulfill his purpose for him, to save the entire world at that point, the entire known world at that point, to save this entire region. That's what he had set him up to do. So when we have suffering in our life, and the Lord has orchestrated like a master chess player, like a master artist, like someone who has taken very great detail to bring us to places, even when it means that we are going to go through suffering to get there. So Joseph, before the suffering, he was arrogant, he was spiteful, think of the kind of character he was as a young man. He had everything given to him that he wanted. He lorded it over his brothers. How brilliant is that? But see, in order to be the man he needed to be, he had to go through the other things in order to be where God wanted him to be at this moment in time. In order to save Israel and his entire family, he had to go through this suffering to accomplish the Lord's will in his life. But not only did he acknowledge that it was God, but he had forgiven God. And he'd embraced God's plan for his life and thrown himself into the merciful hands of the Lord, knowing that he had created this situation so that he would be able to be exactly where he needed to be. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. When the Lord takes us through very hard times, the Lord is going to save our lives with a very great deliverance. And he's going to leave a remnant inside of us of hope. And that's purer than the peripheral hopes that we've had. It's the robe that his father gave him was peripheral, but the Lord left in him a true faith that he said that we've had this terrible famine. There's going to be much more famine. He is saying that even in faith. We can see the end of the story and say, well, yeah, it ended up being 7 whole years. But even understanding that it's still going to be really, really terrible, it's faith. Because the Lord has told him and shown him. The Lord showed him through Pharaoh's dreams, and the Lord showed him that that's what's going to happen. But he's still walking in faith right here, that it's actually going to be that way. That he's collected 20% instead of 10% taxes on the entire nation. That he set up these great granaries around Egypt to feed all of Egypt. All of that is still a step of faith for him. But who is it he trusts the most? He knows that the Lord God has done this to preserve his own family, and it suddenly unfolded before him. When his brothers came, when he sold them the food, it's all right here, it's all pieced together. Not only that, but he is going to have a reconciliation with them. And the Lord has accomplished this in his life. So then it is not you who sent me here, but God. When we go to the place where we realize, even when we're still walking in faith, Lord, you're the one who brought me here. You brought me through so much, and I trust you. I trust that you're still working in my life. I trust that there's a reason for it. Sometimes we get to see that reason. We can look back over our shoulder and we can see, but sometimes it's still out there. But when we have this moment of, wow, the Lord has really done amazing things in my life. The Lord really did bring me to this place so that I could learn to trust him. The Lord really did bring me through it, even though it was so painful. But my character was changed. And those places I walked with the Lord, those very hard, dark places, when he whispered into my heart, those places where he assured me in the dark of night, I wouldn't replace those moments, that intimacy with the Lord. Going to that suffering place like my Savior went, I draw closer to him. He drew close to me and whispered into my ear things that I never would have heard his voice speak to me if I had not gone through that horrific thing. If I wasn't going through this hard thing. There's a way that we're drawn to the Lord, that he whispers into us things that he never could have, because we would have never been to that place of suffering. So then it is not you that sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord to his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. So Pharaoh's consulting him. What do we do next? So Pharaoh is coming to him for advice. He's become the father figure there. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. Don't you know that he was so thrilled that he could embrace them? You know, he was willing to take just Benjamin. But the joy that overflowed him when he realized that they were a place of true repentance, that their hearts had really been changed. The Lord does that with us too, because he waits for us in anticipation that he can pour on us. Now, he's willing to bless only the few. He's willing to bless that one, but he wants to bless all of us. He wants to lavish on us, just as Joseph is able to lavish on his brothers now. But he was willing to just take Benjamin and lavish on him. Now he has the opportunity, the joy, the glee of being able to do this for his entire family, the grandchildren, everyone. Just bring them on in. You shall live I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping. Oh, my goodness, to have been there. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load all your animals, return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. You are also directed to tell them, do this, take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind all your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours. Oh my goodness, talk about winning the lottery. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread, and all of the provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away. And as they were leaving, he said to them, don't quarrel on the way. Don't be upset with each other. Just have fun. Just enjoy what the Lord is doing in your life. So they went out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, can you imagine being there this moment? Joseph is still alive. In fact, he's ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die. So here we have this amazing story of the Lord and his provision through the complicated situation of the life of Joseph and his brothers. I am so glad the Lord has revealed these things to us, because, when our lives are not perfect, when our relationships are broken, when life seems to absolutely be the worst it could possibly be, we know through the Word Get into the Word whenever there are times of despair and read through these stories. And remember, the Lord has a plan for your life. The plan is to redeem you. The plan is to restore you. The plan is to put you in a place where you can redeem and restore others. When we go through great wounds, it's important that we understand now we get to heal those with wounds. If our lives were always what we wish that they were, the Lord would not have his way in us. If Joseph had not been taken away from his family, there would have been no one to save all of Egypt. So whatever the Lord is doing in your life, trust him that he's going to do something great with it. He does not waste our suffering. That's not his way. So cling to him and know that the Lord has a plan for every part of your life today. Love you guys. Have a blessed week.